belief, in some quarters that this entire concept of culture, workplace culture and all, is being imported. In the Indian scenario, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. What's your take on that?
No, I'll give you an example. So when we are talking organizations, EBITDA, performance, fundamentally there are three parts to an organization, right? One is who you are, what you do. Third is how you do what you do. Culture is how you do what you do, right? So if we were at the liberty of taking names, Mr. A would do something in a certain way, Mr. R would do something else, Mr. C would do something else, right? So it's how you do what you do, and fundamentally when you're running an organization, you want to create a glue that holds people together, and that typically flows from the top. So let's say the CXO, the promoter in some cases, or the board say, okay, boss, if we have to solve a problem, this is our way of doing it. This is the Reliance way of doing it. This is the Adani way of doing it, right? That's the culture. Now, which gets manifested in the form of, let's say, a value framework. HR kind of becomes a custodian of driving it. Business heads kind of drive it within the organization. Because the talent that you're getting, because ultimately it's about people. People are doing what they're doing. They are doing what they're, executing. And they are driving the business. But ultimately these people are coming from, the society. They're coming from different organizations. It's a melting pot. So every organization wants that glue which binds everybody together. That is culture, and that culture gets manifested through values. So I'll give an example. I was with a very large diversified group where we had 15 businesses, right? And the challenge that we had was, one business was capital markets, which had a very distinct culture about stock markets. There was a business which was about private banking, very different, which was akin to a private bank. The third business, which is a global investment bank. And we were getting talent because some of these businesses were seeded by us grounds up. We're getting talent from the industry. So a business had a very typical foreign bank. The SME lending business had a very sort of a NBFC culture because they all came from G and NBFCs and stuff like that. Capital markets was very different. At a group level, which is where some of us used to sit, we realized that, boss, as an organization, we are totally divergent from each other, right? When you're meeting a customer, which is the external facing, sort of a manifestation of the organization, 5 different people wearing 5 different hats of the same corporate. How did we drive culture? So we said, listen, we need to now create that common glue. So one of the key roles that some of us had was to create that commonality of goal, vision, and do's and don'ts. Because see, you have to contextualize. It can't be a free fluid sort of a thing. Ki boss, aap apna culture kar lo, Nitin will do his own culture for his own business. You have to contextualize it and structure it. So what we did was we created a group-wide value philosophy, a value framework, just to contextualize it. And we said, listen, these are some of the do's, these are some of the don'ts. 5 do's, 5 don'ts. So as an XYZ organization, when we, irrespective of the business that we represent in the market, this is how we will talk to the customer. This is how we will treat our employees. This is how we will not do a certain thing in a certain scenario. So you have to structure it out.
So you build the culture itself from the ground up.
Absolutely.
Okay. Your question that is it an imported concept? So when I joined one organization and I came from a sector company, so my EVP said, just call me by first name. And I said, no, I've been so used to calling either G or Sir. So
like boss is a very common term in Indian organizations. Some MNCs don't even refer to that.
So he said, if you can't change yourself, then how can you drive change being in HR? So I said, okay, let me try. And I called him by first name. Within 7 to 8 days, I felt the difference. I felt, though I am maybe having lower in hierarchy in the sense of the, the domain or the area of my work, the scope of my work, but I'm at par with him, and it gave me a lot of freedom. So I'm not worried about the imported concept because, even potato is an import, or a tea was not from India. Having said that, if there are good elements of culture which are picked up from other organizations, other countries, and they have worked very well, what is wrong in,
No, I see, the concept of culture is not imported, right? It was always there because this is how you did things. So again, 30 years back, started my career with the public sector. Community, everybody stayed in the same cities, same people you work with, same people you celebrate festivities with. It was how it was working. I think what has changed is some of the language around it. Some of, for example, a chief culture officer was never a role. Now organizations have embraced it. And the point that you were making is because now there is so much more connectivity globally, right? There are organizations which are connected across the geographical cultures, and hence there are certain elements which say we need to feel consistently across the organization, wherever we are, whether it's India or whether it's US or Europe, and that's where some of these elements are coming in, and hence we feel that the culture is imported, right? But the way of working was always there. It just is evolving with the need of.
And I'm reflecting back to the 90s when we started. I mean, think about it. Tata's culture has been there forever, right? We call about Tata's culture, right? We talk about, in my times, it was a Shriram group which used to nurture so much of talent, and it was a culture of Shriram group, right? So
Birlas
had that certain. So there was a Birlas culture, there was a Tata's culture, there was a Shriram group culture. So culture was always there. What it meant was there is a certain way that the organization at a group level used to, what Subhrangshu was talking about, a group level manifested that this is how we want to run our business and this is how we want to treat our people. It always was there, right? To somebody's point, that, has it got some name? Have we labeled it and started studying it in a different way? And now in a more connected world, we probably have a much more appreciation of that. But it has always been there. I don't think it has been.
I'll give you examples. So I generally specialize in building incubations. So there is a concept of mothership, let's say family business, traditional family business, or running a legacy LOBs, and then you came in and you're trying to build a new organization from scratch.
Entrepreneurship.
Right? Entrepreneurship. So of course there will be corporate governance, there will be some policies, but when you are building something new, which is not the essential part of the organization, the top guy, the leader, will have the empowerment to do things in a localized manner basis the new business. Some parts will be inherited, some parts you can do on your own, but the guy on top will take a lot of heat to build this culture. And the leaders he will build inside his organization will make sure that the culture flourish.
In that case, just
Absolutely.
one thing to put into perspective here. If all what you're saying is true, that culture as a concept has existed always, and it has also been ingrained in us, why is it in that case that today as practitioners you find that the Gen Z, who form a sizable chunk of the people you end up hiring, why do they keep shifting and flitting from one job to the other?
That's not to do with the culture, I think. That's more to do with their own thought process, how they want to live their life.
See, I think
what is it that they want to do?
No, and I think, see, I'll tell you just to your point, the core culture of an organization or a group will remain. Okay, that's the DNA strand. It will not change. So if we were to take the liberty of, taking liberty, an Adani culture will remain an Adani culture, but certain new businesses that you do will be empowered to adapt it. But again, the code remains the same. Likewise, there are certain businesses which are, let's say, younger, like a digital business or certain other thing. So classic example is a broadcasting company, this Bennett Coleman, right? I mean, can we take names? Yeah. I was part of that organization, right? Print has been their core. Now, of course, the group has split between the two brothers, but the radio business of a BCCL, the culture is very different, from, let's say, the print business and the television business or the internet business. But there are certain governance frameworks which are there. The core DNA remains the same. Likewise, let's say there are certain businesses where there are more intake of Gen Z and youngsters. You'll have to adapt. If you don't, you'll collapse as an organization. So it's also, you have to evolve.
Yeah, so I would say that, definitely when youngsters are moving and giving the reason that we have not liked the company culture, and that's the reason we are moving, there is a fact because there is a dichotomy here. Look at the families, the way we have brought our children.
Correct.
Like I could never raise my voice against my father, even if I was very angry with him. Or one fine day I would raise, then I would feel so bad about it. But not that my son raises his voice, but we don't shout at him in the sense that, we won't say, we have said, now it's like you have to follow it. So the culture of participation at the family unit level in India, I think in middle class family, I can say has come in a big way in the last 15 years or so, or 2 decades rather, and maybe in the next generation, even in the smaller towns. While the organizations, most of them, the leadership is still the older generation, where it's very hierarchical. So I think there is a mismatch of having.
No, I think there is a need to evolve, and that happens both ways, right? The influence of what is happening outside impacts the company's culture, and what you're doing internally in an organization also impacts. So, for example, if you were to the example that you gave where a security guard was called in and made to feel a part of a celebration. Now, people who are present there are going to take that back with them to their families, right? And they will be far more respectful to the mates and drivers that they interact with. Similarly, today, when the workforce is changing outside, they expect that when they come in, while the core or the DNA, as you mentioned, of the organization doesn't change, but how you manifest that needs to change. If they are expecting more flexibility, you can't say sorry, but it has to be 7 days a week and you have to sit in office, because it will not work.
But if you look at it, I would say, pre-COVID times, there was more adaptability, more openness. If you look at from COVID onwards, organizations have also closed doors.
Could you please elaborate? Why do you say that?
I would say that because, from my own experience, we were more open to listening to newer thoughts, how to operate, ways of working, everything else. Even the largest of the organizations today, no, we won't go hybrid, we will do this. And I understand that there are business challenges related to it. But like to what you said, if you just take a strong stand and say we will not be flexible as leaders of the organization, then that generational divide, actually the gap widens.
I think the culture has changed, and from their perspective, they put their needs before everything else, right? And hence when they come into the organization where they feel that my needs or my interests are not being taken care of, I'll move on, number one. Number two, I've seen within Gen Zs, I've seen two different values. One is, let's call kids coming from entitled backgrounds, and let's say the other kids who struggle and to be where they are, very different requirements. Because the entitled kids are, okay, if this doesn't work, I'll do something else because I have that kind of safety net. Whereas when somebody has come through the different, the difficult grind and been there, that person is more circumspect, that person is more careful, and hence the ability to probably run away at the drop of a hat. I'm using the word run away because that's what they do. If they have one argument with the boss and they want to resign, right? And you scream at one of them, then they want to resign. Whereas, all of us have gone through sales and then we have had bosses screaming at us. But it never occurred to you that, you would want to go and change because you understood there is a reason why this is happening. So I think it's a question of when we speak about Gen Z in an organization, I think it's largely to do, one, with their own interest and their own values, and then whether it matches with the values of the organization.
But attrition is always there, right? So even today you are seeing attrition across the board. It's not that only your 20, 25 years, exactly 25 years old is leaving. Culture is a very important part of what an employee experiences in an organization, but it's not enough to hold them. There are various other factors because of which a person may choose a career, right? Whether it's their growth, their compensation, their location, whatever that could be. But if the culture is toxic, if there is not a culture fit, the person is going to pick up the first call that they get. If the culture isn't bad, if the person is fitting in, maybe the person is going to wait for 2 years before they pick up the call.